are important. So let me start with an important invention in finance that goes way back. Well, I was going to start, I think I mentioned last time, the very simple idea of setting up a company and dividing up shares in the company. That's a really old invention. That's thousands of years old. All right, you and your friends are going to do a business. How do we divide up the profits? Well, let's give shares to each of us. And the guy who's contributing more gets more shares, right? And someone who's contributing less gets less shares. But then we all have an incentive to make the company go, and that's the idea of a corporation. Corporation comes from the Latin word corpus, which is a body. It becomes like a slave owned mutually by all the people in the company. And your share in the company is determined by the number of shares that you own. But I wanted to focus here, that's an old idea, it's an invention, but I wanted to really focus on a particular nuance that developed, was its limited liability. A limited liability corporation is a corporation that guarantees that you as a shareholder will not be liable for the debts of the company. In England, they sometimes will put limited, the name of the company, and after it will say limited. But in the U.S., we just say incorporated. So that tells you that it's limited liability. What it's talking about, limited liability means that somebody sues the company and the company can't pay. They can't go after the stockholders. So limited liability has kind of a complicated history. But according to a history by David Moss, who is a Yale history graduate student when he wrote this, but is now at the Harvard Business School, it started, limited liability really took hold in 1811 with a corporate law in the state of New York, which represented a significant invention. The corporate law of New York in 1811 actually had two important components. The first component was anybody can start a corporation. Just file the papers with the government of New York, and you've got a corporation. There may have been some regulatory requirements, but the point was you didn't need an act of Congress or an act of Parliament to start a corporation. It used to be very hard to start a company because people would say, well, what's your purpose? And, we don't just do this automatically. So that was the first part of the New York law in 1811. But the second part is particularly interesting. They said, under no circumstances can the shareholders be sued. You put in your money to the company, that's it. You are protected by the law. No worries about that. Now, this was the first corporate law in the world, according to Moss, that imposed limited liability as a clear right of the shareholder. There were limited liability clauses before, but it was never so crystal clear. At the same time, around 1811, other states in the United States were looking at New York and saying, you're crazy. What are you doing? You can't sue the shareholders. They could do something irresponsible. And so the state of Massachusetts, at around the same year, made a completely opposite law. And they made it clear that the shareholders are responsible. You invest in a company, you're responsible. And that's the only way it's fair, they thought. Well, guess what happened? New York became the financial center of America. Nobody wanted to set up a company in Massachusetts anymore because they couldn't raise money. The capitalists were at risk. If you bought one share in a company in Massachusetts and the company did something criminal, let's say, or bad, I don't know, something bad, Then they might sue the company and then come looking for anybody who is among the shareholders. You own one share in the company, so we can take everything from you. We can take your house, your car. Well, you didn't have a car. Take whatever you have. So the rule was, be really careful before you invest in any company, and you've got to watch them all the time. But you know what that did? That kept Massachusetts down, because nobody wanted to do that. I mean, you'd only invest with trusted friends. You'd never invest in just some random company. But what happened in New York was that companies started appearing rapidly because of this. And there were, and as many critics said, a lot of these companies are fly-by-night. They're going to go under. We're going to find out that they weren't doing a good business. They were just show-offs, and they go bankrupt. But some of those companies did extremely well, and they created a powerful New York economy. And so then people learn, well, yeah, you could invest in 100 companies, and 99 of them will go under. They're all wild. Not all of them, though. There's one that will be the Walmart and make you rich. So the example set by New York was eventually copied by Massachusetts, by every state in the United States, by every country in Europe, and now every country in the world. It was an experiment that might not have gone well. And you know what David Moss thought, and this has to do with framing again. Moss thought that why is it that New York became such a capital of finance? Because of this law, and because it made investing fun. And this is a matter of framing. And Moss emphasized that when you buy a share in a company and it's limited liability, you know that you've already put out all the money that you'll ever put out, but you could get an infinite amount. Well, there's no limit to the amount of money on the upside. And he thought that it just framed better as a psychologically appealing gamble. It's like a lottery ticket. People like lottery tickets, right? They just enjoy the thought. I don't know, I don't do this, but apparently a lot of people do this. You go and you spend $1 for a lottery, or $2 for a lottery ticket, and then you think, tonight I could be a millionaire, all right? And so that's just so much fun that you want to do it again. But if the lottery ticket said, well, you have a small probability of being a millionaire, but you also have a small probability of going bankrupt, we're going to come after you and take everything. You wouldn't like that. It wouldn't be so much fun, right? You like to savor the possibility of getting rich. And so people flock to these stocks. It's like a sport. It's an invention of something fun to do for a lot of people. But it has this productive side to it, that it funnels capital to where it's needed. So that was an important invention that